And good evening from central London. I'm excited to be back here today. Now, one of the things that I've been seeing across the last few months is that there's a lot of negative news, a lot of negative headlines, not only of last few months, but recent years, especially when it comes to landlords. And I've been somewhat seen as the bearer of bad news. But today I'm excited to share with you that I bring good news if you're a landlord, especially a landlord looking to stay in the current market, because we're going to be sharing what hotspots across the country are actually increasing in yields. So if you've not joined any of my live streams before, what we try to do with this is to be very interactive. The purpose of this is just ask questions if you're live on the video. And of course, if you're watching it after by being recorded, you can always leave your comments. But again, we are looking for an interactive session. So I'm coming to you from central London. We'll also be sharing what the yields are doing right now here in the capital, but also across the Midlands and up north. Last week, we did discuss a little bit with regards to taxes. And this week, we are just going with the headlines today because it is all about yields. We'll also be talking about a lot of landlords incorporating and what the downsides and upsides of that is. But what's most interesting is those landlords are incorporating, where exactly are they buying in the country? And that's some interesting stats. And then we'll move on to look at a little bit more about the rental market itself. We'll go a bit macro. We'll go a little bit region by region. But what we do know about property, of course, is that property is hyper-local. So do take this information. And if you want to dive deep in the specific region, just let me know, because things can vary. Okay. So first up is making sure that everyone can hear me, which is the most important thing, and the video is all good. It looks like we're all good to go, and we'll be sharing a few articles. As I said, anyone here from the capital itself, from London, just give me a shout, let me know. Trying to organize my hair here. Just let me know. And again, I'm here. I'm happy to share some information. So let's dive straight into the article that points out that is, it's great up north, highest rental yields anywhere in England. Okay, I'm sure that doesn't come to a surprise to many people out there. The highest yield you are going to get is going to be north, and the highest you go up north, the higher that reward you're going to get. So rental yields achieved by landlords in the northeast, northwest, and Yorkshire and Humber are the highest of any English region. The data comes from specialist lender Paragon Bank, which says that with average yields of 8.13%, the Northeast tops its regional rental yield table, compiled using the specialist lender's own lending data. Wales, where landlords can generate returns of up to 8% plus, comes in at close second. And the Northwest makes up the top three due to buy-to-let properties delivering average returns of up to 7.84%. What is interesting is I've been seeing a lot of news come out from Wales, whether that be short-term rental for holiday lets, whether that be HMOs. And it's a trend that I've seen over the course of the last few months and even years. I mean, I bump into quite a few landlords and investors, and especially young investors, which they seem to be getting younger and younger. And their strategy is, number one, it's Wales, but number one is because the cost of actually getting into the market is so low. You have properties you can purchase out there for around about 60 to 80,000 pounds in good areas. They fix them up with a minimum amount of money, and then of course you have that short-term rental if you are sort of looking at that path of investment. But even a long-term rental, as per this article, will be enough to give you the yields of 8%. So that's interesting. And as to where Wales is in terms of that maturity, if there is still enough room for investors to get in there. So very interesting news there. And we're going to start working our way downwards to the south, because there are also some interesting stats there, not only from this article, but from others. So Wales, where landlords generate, okay, yeah. So what we have here, another northern region, Yorkshire and Humber, also offers yields above the England, Scotland, and Wales average of 7.17%. Landlords in that region can achieve rental yields of 7.5%, placing it fourth in its rental returns table. So here we are. I want to try and zoom this out so you can see the most of this. Ooh, too much there. So what we have is region. So as you can see, you've got the northeast here being at 8.13%, Wales at 8%, northwest, Yorkshire and Humber going down in the sevens. You see Scotland and southwest, East Anglia also sort of hovering around those 7%. West Midlands 6.8%, East Midlands 6%. I must say I do like West and East Midlands. And then you've got the Southeast, which is 6%, and Greater London 5%. Now, there is no real kind of surprise here in terms of London and Southeast being the lowest in yield. What we do know, typically at least, is that in the Southeast, specifically when you look at the capital, is where you win at properties, not so much in the yield, but you win in that capital growth, which London never seems to fail. However, if we do look at the last sort of 10 to 12 years, it has taken longer than previous sort of booms that we've seen. Could there be a boom around the corner? Well, I mean, for those of you who have been following my channel and our sort of weekly updates, we do know that based on the data that we see, there's no specific boom coming anytime soon, but there does seem to be more resilience in the capital, and that's in comparison to other parts of the country when we talk about sales and pricing actually holding up, and that's for various reasons. First of all, we know that there are regions sort of around the coast of the country whereby the supply has increased substantially. And one of the reasons for that is because of the boom of short term rental. So, those holiday homes, especially during the pandemic, it was the next best thing. Of course, we had that staycation. It was all about staycation. It was all about people not even having the means to go out the country or not being able to do so because they didn't have, all the requirements with the vaccinations, which I'm not going to go into. That's a completely different topic. But anyway, the reality is that shift has moved. So a lot of people are actually traveling, and the weather in England hasn't been great. Surprise, surprise. But specifically this year, it's been a very wet summer and also a spring as well. And a lot of people have been traveling. Another thing is that a lot of landlords has shifted to short-term rentals to get over the whole mortgage interest cost and being able to deduct that from their cost of business. And of course, what we do know is by April 2025, that benefit is going to be removed from short-term rentals as well. So a combination of things there, but also we are talking about those regulations that everyone is kind of anticipating for short term, because the new government that's come in at least, has been making a lot of noise that they do want to kind of level up the playing field when it comes to long term and short term rental, and trying to bring those short term rental into the long term rental market again. And again, there are a lot of conflicting stories around this, because if you look at my live stream a couple of weeks ago, Airbnb shares some very interesting stats and numbers whereby they say that Airbnb has very little or no impact whatsoever when it comes to the rental crisis, and also that it has not in fact taken any homes away, or any substantial homes in comparison to the amount of properties are in the UK away from the long-term rental market. So what we do know is that 40%, that's 40% increase in some regions of the country. And this is particularly where those short-term rental properties boomed, and a lot of people actually want to sell their homes now. So these are people with second homes. And that is, again, trying to get ahead of any potential tax hikes, but also getting ahead of councils sort of doubling and tripling the council tax, targeting, of course, those short-term rental landlords, which we've already seen. I believe in some parts of the country, it was around about 200% increase in council tax. The council then got together, saw that it was actually creating a lot of disruption, and actually reduced that ever so slightly to 150%. But still, there are tax hikes and regulations that are going to come into play when it comes to those sellers who have properties, second homes in certain regions, especially I believe it was Cornwall, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so going back to the article. We have Southeast, 6% and 5% Greater London. Again, there is no surprise there when it comes to these figures being lower than the North. But, 8% up Northeast, 5% London. Okay, so along with continued strong demand reported by landlords across the UK, a key component of the North's yield performance is relatively affordability of property. The Office of National Statistic Housing Affordability in England and Wales reveals that the most local authorities in 2023 were in the Northeast, Northwest, and Yorkshire and Humber. The report authors calculate affordability by dividing the house of prices by gross annual work-based earnings. Homes purchased in England and Wales throughout 2023 commanded 8.3 and 6.1 times a full-time employee's annual salary. Okay. Respectively, across the three northern regions, only 4 local authorities had ratios above 8, with more local authorities with affordability ratios below 5 than above. The Northeast was the most affordable local authority overall. London were 8 in 10 local authorities have affordability ratios of above 12, was the least affordable. So again, just goes down to that affordability, especially when it comes to the North compared to the South. Bear with me one moment, guys, because I'm going to end up without any battery and we're going to be logged off. Whew, okay, phew. So we are back. So as I was saying, that affordability compared between North and South, and that's why typically that's North and South divide, both in terms of sales in buy, what you can buy, and also in terms of rentals. That's why it's always been consistent in the difference of that activity between the two. London, of course, you that are much more expensive, and that mortgage and that Section 24, which of course was a removal of being able to offset your mortgage interest as costs, hit the most when it comes to the capital, and that hurt most of the landlords here, which is why, by the way, we are seeing when we look at the statistics, when we look at the North compared to the South, what we do know is almost a third, that's 29% of properties currently on the market for sale in the capital were formerly rental properties. Again, I'll repeat that for perspective. Almost a third, that's 29% of properties on the market currently for sale, at least this was reported by Rightmove from the previous month, for sale were previously on the market for sale. And that doesn't surprise me because there are a lot of landlords out there that are struggling. But I'll tell you, the major issue is Section 24. And we've looked at the impact of Section 24 because we've dived in to those reports and shown how that has impacted a lot of landlords. This is without obviously also talking about the stamp duty surcharge of 3%. But anyway, as I said, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news here. This is all about good news and looking at the high yields across the country. And it's not only bad news for London, because one thing I will say in the capital, previously we struggled to see percentages of yields going around about the 4%. At the moment, I'm seeing a lot of properties that you can achieve between 5 and 6%. That was unheard of around about 5 years ago. And of course, we had cheaper money. Yes, interest rates were low. But again, it all depends on where you are in terms of investment and whether you have that cash. But if you have cash right now here in London, I tell you, there are some great opportunities right now. And that is good news for those investors. For those who don't have that cash and have properties and have assets and are struggling, my advice, of course, if it's worth anything, is ride it out, because we do see interest going down. We do see those announcements from the Bank of England saying that it is going down as well. And although rental is not increasing at the same pace, and you didn't want it to increase at the same double digits. Trust me, it just wasn't sustainable for anyone, and it wasn't a benefit in the long term, at least, for anyone for those double digits to continue in that way. But good news, yields, rental prices still going up, not as fast, and number two, those mortgage rates going down. So we've got Louisa Sedgwick, Paragon Bank, Managing Director of Mortgage, says, our latest report draws on the industry data to reveal that during the last decade, the north of England has surpassed the south in terms of proportion of buy-to-let homes purchases. And we're going to talk a lot more about that in terms of where are these people located in the country who are buying properties in the north. Are they in the north or are they based in the south? That's going to be the interesting figure that we're going to be sharing with you very shortly. So stay tuned. So I think one of the reasons why the region has increasingly gained the attention of landlords is the opportunity to generate strong returns on investment. Demand for rented homes is high in the north, as it is across the UK, with property that can be significantly more affordable to buy compared to the southern regions. Landlords are able to respond confident, and they will be able to achieve above yields. So I hope some of this is making sense. I know that we did dive into this live stream early today, and I'm seeing more people jumping on. In the meantime, let's have a look at what questions we have. I was always happy to find out your thoughts, and this is all part of this live stream. So we are almost 20 minutes in. Hello, Leslie, how you doing? And we've got here question from Jonathan. So we have, Danny, in your opinion, how sustainable are these high yields in the Northwest given current economic climate? I don't. I think there are two factors, and I'm no economist here, Jonathan. But I was having a chat with one of our recruiters here in the office, and she was sharing with me that a lot of companies at the moment are being quite cautious in hiring. So they are pausing on their hiring, and they are having a preference um, on hiring temps, and something that trend that they're seeing more and more as they get towards the end of the year. I don't think that's surprising, given that there's been a shift in government. I mean, the last time we had a Labour government in this country, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's sort of in the region of around about 14 years. So, of course, a lot of people are going to be nervous. I know that there is a lot of optimism on the market, but it is cautious optimism. And that's sensible to have, to be honest with you. Again, change in the government. There is a lot of instability when it comes to political instability, especially when we look at the Middle East. I say that, but then again, we also look at to the US, and we also have a lot of instability there. And it will be great to find out your thoughts on the US elections. And of course, what we do know, being the superpower that they are, it's going to have a natural impact across at least the Western countries. What we do also know is that the reserve out there have also announced that they will be sort of reducing more interest rates, or the base rate out there, the reserve out there. So it'll be interesting to find out what Bank of England here had said, that they may be aggressively reducing interest or the base rate, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure they use the word aggressive, which is very interesting. So to answer your question, Jonathan, so I think the sustainability is going to be based on not only the economy itself, but also to find out what the budget holds for all of us at the end of this month, which actually is next week. So for those of you who are not subscribed to the channel, do make sure that you subscribe, because we will be having a tax expert. I believe it's next week or the following week. I'm pretty sure it's Wednesday evening. We'll have that tax expert on, and sharing his opinion and his expertise, not only from a landlord point of view, but just in general. But he does specialize in taxes overall, but especially with landlord, has a lot of experience. So do stay tuned. I hope that's helpful for you, Jonathan. And let's jump into Leslie. My question for today is: do you think the rental demand in Yorkshire and Humber will remain strong, or could it decline as house prices rise? This is going to be linked back to Jonathan's question, Leslie, which is that I think the sustainability is going to be really based on jobs and rent and oversupply. I think those three factors are what's going to influence the buy to let health, at least, whether short term or medium term, because we do know that we have a lot of build to rent companies out there. There are funds. And banks and insurance companies and retail companies all getting into the buy to let but build to rent industry. And we're seeing a lot of building in those regions. So we don't want to find ourselves in a place where we have oversupply and that demand starts to slow down. Demand meaning people renting properties. If those jobs aren't there, if there isn't confidence in the economy, then that will start to have an impact on rental prices. So I think that is the question that a lot of people ask. Even looking at Manchester, I mean, this was a question, and what made a lot of people nervous about Manchester. It's growing too big, quick. Prices is increasing far too quickly, both from sales and rental, and there's too much build, and there's going to be an oversupply. And that's what they've been saying for around about 3 to 4 years, and it's not. It's still going strong. In fact, Manchester, when it comes to sales, there's been an increase on price, and everyone thought it was already saturated. So very interesting dynamics happening out there in comparison to the capital. So we have Edmund. I would like to add to Jonathan's question that with yields above 8%, do you think we'll see more landlords moving away from London to invest in London? London is a different beast, Edmund. I believe that a lot of people who do purchase in London has different appeals to this type of target audience. There is a sense of vanity in London, especially when you look at areas such as Kensington and Chelsea and Hampstead, these types of areas. So there is an element of vanity, number one. There's also an element of safety and security. We all know if you want high yields, and this goes for any type of market, by the way, Edmund, this goes for property, this goes for shares or anything like that. The higher the risk, the higher the reward. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that everywhere up north or outside the capital is going to be a higher risk, but certainly when you start looking at yields like 8%, 9%, remember 8% is the average in these areas. There are neighborhoods in these areas where probably you could get 10%. But I believe once you start hitting those yields, what I've seen, at least in the research that I've done, you're getting into very dangerous territory. You are getting tenants that perhaps are not going to be the most sustainable and going to be the most appealing for an investor. Some people don't care and they're willing to take that risk. That isn't something that I know a lot of our landlords that we speak to are willing to take. And those are the type of landlords that prefer to actually stay in the capital and keep that 5% and happy with that in comparison to 8%. So we know that London is also a global hub and demand is always here. And the thing is that when the market does shift, and believe me, it will shift because that's what markets do. They never stay the same. When you have a boom in rent, like we've had, of course, in the last 3 to 4 years, we've had the boom in rent of double digits. I mean, we're talking about 30% plus over the course of the last 3 to 4 years. And what we do know is that every boom has an end. I'm not necessarily calling it a bust. I'm not saying that rentals are going down. No, I'm not saying that. In fact, they're still going up. They're just not going up. They're slowing in terms at the rate of the increase. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing for both landlords and tenants and everyone in the property sector. I mean, there was I wish I can share. What I'm going to try and do here on these live streams is try and share some videos. But I was seeing the debate with the renters' rights bill. And I was hearing someone who was there, a speaker, and he was saying that he was getting, within sort of 2 hours of putting the property on the market, sort of several people giving him 12 months rent in advance, where he wasn't even asking for the 12 months. But it just gives you an idea, an indication of that demand that's in the market and why rents are increasing so much. But what I'm saying is that double-digit growth is not sustainable. And 8%. And to your question, do you think we'll see more landlords moving away from London to invest in the north? I'm going to share some facts. I'm not going to share my opinion with you, Edmund. I'm going to share some facts that I have for you. And that's going to answer this question for you very shortly. And I'm going to say it depends on the type of landlords, yes. And some landlords may move away, but those who do invest in property in London may diversify, but not leave London completely. Okay, great. So Daniel, hi Daniel, hope you're well, mate. I've just bought a rental property in the East Midlands and yields are better on the rental. It's a 2-bed semi-detached property, but it's been advertised for a month. Okay, I'm going to have to read this again. I've just bought a rental property in the East Midlands. The yields are better on the rental. It's a 2-bed semi-detached property, but it's been advertised for a month. Okay. When you say it's been advertised, okay, you have a follow-up question here, I believe. And I've only had one viewing and a few inquiries according to the agent. So I think that demand is not so great in that part of the world. Okay. So we are looking here in East Midlands. It will be interesting to find out what part of East Midlands would be helpful, Daniel, and I probably can share my perspective of that. One thing to be careful, I mean, I went out to see a property investment out in the Midlands. This was at the beginning of the year. And what I found was the whole building, and there was probably around about 120, the whole building had been purchased by buy-to-let investors. So when I went to see the property to look at it as an investment, there was still around 60 of these units available, all available for rent. And they were pretty much the same. I mean, they may change it in terms of aspects of the level of floor, and there was only 4 floors. But for me, that didn't appeal to me. I was competing with 60 others at that point in time. And of course, there is something to be said that once a development is built, that's going to be the most challenging time to find a tenant. So again, Daniel, to put things into perspective, it's for me, I need more context, because is it a new build? And if so, if it's a new build, what percentage of it has gone to buy-to-let investors, and so forth and so forth. So there's all these factors to take into consideration. For me, that really didn't appeal to me, to have to compete with 120, maybe not all at the same time, buy-to-let investors with properties exactly the same as the one that I was going to purchase. Really doesn't appeal to me. I'd rather look at a building whereby maybe 20% of the building is our rental properties, the rest is homeowners, and I'm good with that. That's just my opinion. Everyone has different strategies. But all I can say to you, Daniel, is when you are marketing a property and it's not renting out, it's always going to come down to 3 factors. There are many, but 3 major factors. Number 1 is going to be presentation. How does the property look? How is it presented? A lot of people, a lot of agents, and a lot of landlords, think it makes no difference, and they take a photo with their phone and just slap it on the portals. Presentation, number 1. Number 2 is the exposure. So you can have the best looking photography in the world with the best description as well. But if it's not put in front of the right people, then you have a problem. So you can look at Rightmove, you can look at Zoopla. Yeah, these portals are important and they make part of your marketing strategy, but they shouldn't make the major part. It shouldn't be exclusively you relying on Rightmove and Zoopla. So my question to you, Daniel, would be asking your agent, show me the strategy that you have for the marketing. If they're just showing you Rightmove and Zoopla, I think you have a problem. So looking into that. So exposure is the second one thing. And you may ask, well, what other areas are there? Well, a good agent should have a pool of applicants already on their database to show your property, and also should be leveraging the power of social media. Okay, so exposure is number two, Daniel. And number three, dare I say it, and this is the bit that most landlords don't like, is pricing. So presentation, exposure, and pricing. Now, you have control over pricing as a landlord. You have some degree of control when it comes to marketing, but that should be really your agent's job to make sure it's on point. Okay, Daniel, I can see you've done a follow up here. It's in Langley Mill, mate. Okay, M1 Motorway Junction 26, down days, semi detached property, about 20 years old with some street parking. Okay. Yeah, so this is completely different to what I've shared with regards to a new build. I will say just really have that conversation with your agent, Daniel. If possible, if you're not local, make it a video call, and ask him to or her to give you some more information as to what's happening specifically to the market. But this isn't just information coming out of his mouth or her mouth. This is actual evidence of what's happening. Have they overpriced the property? How did you get to choose this agent? Did they win the listing from you? So when I say win the listing, even buy the listing from you, what I mean by that, there is a saying in the industry that agents to win your business will go around and say to you, Daniel, your property is worth X amount. And they have no evidence whatsoever to back that up. And that amount that they've told you sounds much more attractive than the amount that the other 3, 4 agents have told you. And therefore, you give it to that agent, and they've effectively bought your listing, bought the listing from you because they've told you what you want to hear to then start bringing the price down. I was going to jump in and share a little bit about the condition about the property, Daniel, but I don't think that's your problem at this point, at least. My advice to you is make sure the property looks its very best before you start changing the strategy on the marketing, whether that's photos, whether that's agents, and whether that's pricing. But those 3 points should help you out when it comes to marketing, Daniel. Okay, so Samantha, I've heard about Northeast lately. Danny, is there room for investors to make a profit, or is the market becoming oversaturated? I'm hearing some good news, Samantha. I've been looking into the area and the regions, and I think it's very good. There are a lot of regenerations happening out there. Again, I think you have to be careful with these new builds. I'm not saying they're a bad idea. I think they're great, and I think that's the way moving forward. But then you do need to know your stuff. You need to know your research and who you're buying from, and look at the pricing as well. Does it match up with what you're buying with regards to what you'll be able to achieve? And take into consideration that this boom in rental increase is coming to an end, and we're going to have more sustainable, more normal rental increases. Okay, so appreciate. Okay, great. And then we have I'm based in South, but looking to invest up north. What's the best way to manage properties from a distance? Oh, that's a great question. I would always say get an agent, especially where we are getting into a market or a government that's going to make things rather challenging for landlords. And if you make a mistake, it can cost you, and it can wipe your profit out for years if you get the wrong tenant. So my advice is actually wise process. We put out a video last week, which is the number one mistake landlords are making right now. I would urge you to look at that video, because that's going to answer your question as to how to manage your property from a distance, I hope. And if it doesn't, come back to me. Happy to share some more information. So, guys, thank you for your questions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue to go through some articles here with regards to the rental increase that we're seeing. So I guess the very first thing I'm going to go and look at is the rental market, as we've seen from Rightmove, which is going to tell us exactly what is happening in the market. So record high rents as landlords brace for budget impact. So we're going to go through the bullet points. We'll probably skim through some of these graphs, but this is going to tell us the key point of the report. So this report is looking at the largest quarterly database of UK for Q3 report for July to September 2024. So this is quite recent information, and I know it's proven to be very helpful with quite a few landlords that we speak out there. So average advertised rents outside London hit 19th consecutive quarterly record of 1,344 per calendar month, up 5% from last year. Again, these are more sustainable increases, but increases nevertheless, although this is the slowest rate of growth since 2021. Okay, London rents also hit a new record at £2,694. That's a 2.5% higher than last year of £2,627. Okay, and that is London. So, and this, I'm going to assume this is Greater London, but if we look at inner London, that actually goes up, I'm pretty sure. So just want to put that out there. The balance between supply and demand continues to improve compared with last year, but letting agents are still very busy with high numbers of tenants looking to move. The average number of inquiries per rental property is now 15, down from 23 last year, but nearly double the 8 recorded in 2019. Well, at least it's more sustainable with 15 in comparison to around about 50 that we were seeing sort of 2 years ago, which was absolutely crazy. Within 24 hours, letting agents were taking properties down from the portals because they couldn't cope with the amount of incoming inquiries. So available supply has increased by 13% on year, through though this still 27% below 2019 levels, highlighting continued pressure on rental availability. More than a fifth of rental properties are currently seeing reduction in the advertised rental price before finding a tenant, compared with 16% last year. I'll repeat that. More than a fifth of rental properties are currently seeing a reduction in the advertised rental price before finding a tenant, compared with 16% last year. Interesting. So that's 20% in comparison to that 16%. And I hope that shares some light on the question that Daniel was asking me as well. So this is not only perhaps, Daniel, in your region, as I've just shared with Rightmove, it says that this is up by 20% in comparison to 16% last year in terms of reduction. So that is increasing the number of properties that are seeing the reduction of pricing in comparison. So it appears that some landlords are bracing for the potential capital gains tax rise in autumn budget, as well as new EPC regulations with record proportion of former rental homes currently on the market for sale. Rightmove hopes to see measures from the government that encourage landlords to stay in the market and help them with the transition to greener homes. That is one of the things that have spooked a lot of landlords, actually. It is the EPC and what they're planning to do for 2030. And that is probably a topic and a live stream that we should do at some point. But I know that next week what we will be doing is having that the tax increase. I'm going to fix my camera, so bear with me, guys. So I'm hoping that's somewhat better. That has made me okay. So Okay, so this should be better. And so we are looking at the EPC, as I said, a lot of regulations coming our way. And one thing I also wanted to share with you is what's happening currently in London specifically. So, any landlords online that are from the capital, I believe this will be of interest to you. And this is the Prime London. And we're going to read the key aspects here when it comes to rents. So rents remain high above their pre-pandemic average. Annual rental growth increased to 2.6%. And remember, this is prime London, guys. So this is going to be slightly different to what Rightmove shares when it looks across whole of London, which is very different. Average rent across prime London are 31% above their 2017 and 2019 pre-pandemic average. And this is what I shared with you. These are 30% increase over the course of 4 years. Lonra's data for August indicated an annual increase of 14.5% in lets agreed and 7.7% decrease in new instruction with activity on both measures remaining well below pre-pandemic levels. The stock of available rental properties fell slightly on a monthly basis, but grew on an annual basis with 6% more homes on the market across prime London at the end of August. So I'm going to wrap up the rental uh, data. But for those of you who have been joining me or just joined, we have been sharing as to what's happening with the yields across the country, and more specifically, what's been happening with the yields in the Northeast and the Midlands. And we shared some information here when it talked about every region here. So if you're just joining, we're looking at 8% when we look at Northeast, and when we look at London and the Southeast, we are looking at numbers around about that 5%. So the big question is, are there any landlords staying in the market? If so, why? And what exactly are they doing to make buy-to-let viable? Well, this is an interesting article that I wanted to share with you right now, which probably answered those questions. First up, let's look at why they're actually staying in the market. So what keeps landlords in the buy-to-let business? So what keeps landlords in the buy-to-let business? I've shared this a few times before, but it is long-term rental demand. So 6 in 10 landlords, 60% cited the ongoing demand for rental properties as the reason for staying in the market. Retirement income, over half of landlords, that's 54%, are looking to add properties to their portfolio. Capital appreciation, and this is the one that I feel that should be the biggest reason, because this is where you win with property every time instead of yield. So again, I shared with you yields, and that's great. But if you are a property investor in this for the long term, and you should be, what you should really be focusing on, of course, capital growth, lead with capital growth, and then I would lead and then trail with yields personally. That's what I've seen the most successful investors do. And then preference for property. Over a third of landlords, that's 34%, prefer property as an investment over other options. And this is for a mixture of reasons, being that property is more tangible and knowing that they see property as a path of generational wealth and to pass on to their children or their family. So the next question, of course, is what are landlords doing to make buy-to-let viable? And this is where I want to share with you. I don't seem to find the article for some reason. I'll keep landlord greater prime London rental track our portfolio space. Okay, bear with me one moment as I search. Okay, here you are. Thanks for holding, guys. And so here is the article I want to share with you. The number of limited companies set up by landlords at record levels. So limited companies are now the new norm for UK landlords, with over 46,000 companies set up between January and September 2024 year on year, a rise of 23% and more than the total of 2021, according to Hamptons. Okay. So this is where landlords are focusing on, because as I said, the impact of Section 24, and I've shared that a few times. I'll share that on the description as well, because there was a great report provided by Property Mark, whereby they share that impact of Section 24. And that's got to be the biggest factor and the biggest thing that has influenced a lot of landlords leaving the market, because that's what's hit the pocket the most. And of course, there are many things, but this is going to be the one that had the greatest impact, especially where mortgage rates increased substantially. So September 2024 saw 4,312 new limited companies set up to hold buy-to-let property across Great Britain. Hampton's analysis of companies' house data that this figure now stands at 28% higher than the previous September 2023 record. It also represents the third highest monthly figure on record, following the 5,854 set up in April 2024 and 5,442 in February. Okay, the record number of new incorporations so far this year means there were a total of 46,000 companies set up between January and September 2024, a 23% increase on the same period last year, which itself marked the highest year for new incorporations. This means that more companies have been set up so far this year than during the whole of 2021. Now, one question I get asked a lot is, Danny, is it worth setting up a limited company? And that depends completely on your situation. I'm not a tax expert, I'm not a tax advisor, and I'm certainly not a financial advisor. My advice is always speak to a tax expert. If you need one and you're looking for one, always happy to guide you in the right direction. Just shoot me a message. But my point here is that setting up a limited company isn't cheap either. I mean, the setup is cheap, but the ongoing maintenance of that company isn't going to be cheap. So you need to sort of weigh up as to what your strategy is. If you're just going to have one property and put it in a limited company, I will question whether that's going to be viable, knowing sort of the ongoing cost that's going to involve, and also your time and your investment in time in that. So again, that's something to review yourself on whether it's worthwhile. But stay online, because this is the biggest figure that I'm going to share with you right now. May surprise quite a few of you, or may not surprise. I don't know. But let's have a look at this. The increase has been driven by the different ways buy-to-let in companies and buy-to-lets in personal names are taxed, with landlords no longer able to fully claim mortgage interest at cost. As a cost, more new purchases are going into company structure. Here's the big one. I'm going to jump straight into it. So we have 59 of these new companies have been set up in the southeast of England, where high interest rates have hit the hardest and where larger shares of households are the highest taxpayers. It's these landlords who are the most likely to benefit from incorporation. However, drum roll, only 42% of properties bought by limited companies so far this year are in the south of England. This highlights how many southern-based landlords are investing in Midlands or north of England, where yields tend to be higher. I'll repeat that if you missed that. 59% of these new companies have been set up in the south of England. However, only 42% of properties bought by limited companies so far this year have been in the south of England. This highlights how many southern-based landlords are investing in Midlands or the north of England, where yields tend to be higher. So this goes back to some of the questions you guys have asked me online. Are landlords really leaving London? And the truth is that landlords that I've been speaking to, what they have been doing is they have been diversifying. They are selling some of their properties so they can restructure some of those because they didn't have the properties in the company name. In a limited company, held in a limited company, but also they very much do want to keep properties in London because they do see the potential of those properties, and they do see that London continues to be a stronghold for holding those buy-to-let properties. But they are certainly diversifying and looking elsewhere, which is interesting. And this article does confirm and gives us more information. Okay, great. So we have 10 minutes left, and I'm going to share with you. Let's see if we had any other article. Before we go into this one, actually, let's look at any other questions here. That's a great question, Andrew. So what I can say when the pandemic hit, what I do know is their money going so much further in other regions, and since the pandemic hit, whereby a lot of tenants can actually live outside, and of course, if they had money to buy, some may do because a lot of younger generations decided not to buy property. They invest in property, but they don't buy the home to that they live in. But to answer your question, what I did see was a lot of people, and people I know, who are living up north because their money goes further up there in terms of living, including rent, and they only have to come into London maybe once a month, maybe even once a week. So that has kind of shifted people's perspective as to, okay, well, if my money gets further here and I can still keep my job, then I'm getting London money, but then I'm living my expenses is northern money, if that makes sense, and that goes for other parts of the world as well. A lot of people can live in other parts of the world while still getting UK or London money, so that has an element to it. But in general, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I know that there are more jobs created in places like Manchester, and especially Leeds, where it's a financial district. But yeah, it will be interesting to find out a little bit more about that, Andrew. So, what about rising interest rates? How do you think landlords can still maintain healthy rental yields? Well, if anything, we do know, Stephen, is that those interest rates are going down. Of course, if you're going to compare it to what we had, sort of the golden years, which is what I call them. Then when we had cheap money, I don't think those times are coming anytime soon back, if any time at all. But we're certainly seeing better interest rates now than we've seen in the last sort of 2 years. So I hope that helps. And Stephen, I've also noticed that rental demand plays a significant role in the market. How does the influence of my ability to raise rents without losing tenants? Well, if you have tenants at the moment and you're going through a rental review, then assuming that those tenants are staying in the same area, as long as you do your market research or you have a good agent that's doing the market research for you, as long as it's fair market price, then you increase your rent accordingly. But if you're going to go above the market rate, then your tenants are clearly going to look at the rent and move elsewhere. And it's not uncommon, especially when rents aren't increasing that much. The thing is here is, and this is where a lot of landlords get used to, because I used to speak a lot to landlords whereby they would have rent increase for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then suddenly there comes a time where the market shifts, there is no rent increase, and they're saying, well, Danny, I've had 5 years of rental increase, why would I not increase it now? Well, it's because the market has shifted, and that's what markets do, you know. And this year there may not be any increase. Maybe next year there may not be, but maybe after that there will be another 5 years of rental increase. You have to follow the market. You just can't make up the numbers. So I hope that makes sense, because at the end of the day, is a tenant going to pay you the rent at market value, or are they going to pay you rent based because you're just used to the rent increasing and just because, or this because you want? It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. I hope that makes sense. So Martin Price or Pierce, how are you, Danny? I'm doing amazing, Martin, and good to see you or hear from you. What's your opinion on the rent to rent strategies? Do they help investors boost yields in a competitive market? I'm not a big fan, Martin, if I'm quite honest with you. The rent to rent market, and I'll tell you why. Let me give you some context on that. The rent to rent market, what we saw over the course of last 4 to 5 years was every Tom, Dick, and Harry suddenly becoming rent to rent experts and had or have absolutely no experience. They're around for the boom. And then when things go south, they disappear. And that guaranteed rent that they promise you is no more. And then you're stuck with tenants. I saw this back in 2000 and what was this? Probably 2014, give or take, 2015, where we had the rent to rent business model, but this was with HMOs. So this was the rent to rent whereby, and by the way, for you guys that are not familiar with the rent to rent, this is where someone says to you, Mr. Landlord, let me take your property from you. I will become your tenant and then I will sublet the property. Now, that's become much more popular over the course of the last 5 years, given the short-term rental boom that we've seen with holiday lets. So then suddenly someone who wasn't an expert in the property industry would just come along, roll up and say, give it to me, I'll guarantee you the rent. Problem with that is that they have no idea whatsoever with regards to compliance. They have no idea of regulations, legislations, have no certificates whatsoever. In most cases, don't even have insurance. Now, the mistake that a lot of landlords make is they think that because they're passing this on to someone else and signing a contract, it's no longer the responsibility. Wrong. It is always the landlord's responsibility. Whatever happens to those tenants is going to be your responsibility. Whatever. So I would say if this is going to happen and you're going to go down the rent to rent route, do your due diligence and make sure it's a reputable company. Reputable, I don't mean sort of 2 3 years up and running. Look at the reviews. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do a video on that. I'm going to do a video on the mistakes that landlords make when it comes to rent, and allow you guys to form your own opinions. As you can see, Martin, not a big fan of the rent to rent. That being said, it can work very well if it's coming from a reputable company who has a history and a track record. And that track record, I'm not talking about a couple of 24, 36 months. That isn't what I'm talking about. Make sure you look for those certificates, you look at the insurance, look at reviews and everything else. So I hope that helps, Martin, and look out for that mistake for rent to rent, which I will be putting through. Then I have a limited budget. What's the best way to maximize rental yield without over leveraging? Depends on your circumstance. Sorry, Leslie. I need more context. Perhaps shoot me a message and I'll see if I can help in the way. But I guess the best way I can say to you would be if you have a limited budget, then that's going to depend on what region you're going to be able to invest in. And again, we've talked about a lot about North. We've talked about Wales, providing some great opportunities. But then again, how far are you from that region? And can you invest and manage your property from there? Yeah, I hope that helps. So, Samantha, how is taxation policy from government is affecting rental yields? Well, we're going to find that out next week, Samantha, in detail. Once the government sort of provides us with the information, we're all on standby. But what I can say is I'm going to put a link to the description with the impact of Section 24. And if the government is smart enough, they probably have read this article because it goes in depth. It's not even an article, it's a report, an in-depth report by Property Mark, who's done some fantastic research and findings on the impact of Section 24, which of course is the removal of being able to deduct your mortgage interest as a cost which is, every business owner's right to do. You put your any cost that you have, you can put that as well, any expense, you put it as a cost, but that's been removed for landlords, unfortunately. So for those of you who are just joining, we have, just as a quick recap, we have reviewed sort of the landlords incorporating and the amount of landlords incorporating, and of course this is to maneuver and to minimize those tax burdens that they've been seeing across the last 4 or 5 years with the Section 24 implementation, thanks to George Osborne era back in 2016. There are now a total of 382,000 companies across Great Britain set up to hold rental property. 74% of these have been incorporated since the start of 2016, the point which landlords were a higher rate taxpayers stopped being able to fully offset their mortgage interest rate from their tax bill. And for those of you that perhaps aren't aware, this was faded in, of course, between 2017 and 2020, and then replaced by, I believe, some tax, but capped at 20%. So the rising number of companies set up by halt by let properties means that the vast majority of new landlords purchases now go into a limited company. So far this year, 70% of new buy-to-let purchases in England and Wales were made using limited companies, with the remaining 30% being bought in personal names, which that's crazy. But, everyone is different, of course. This is why I say speak to a tax expert. So in the total, there are 666,000 properties held inside buy-to-let limited companies. And again, I need to repeat this. Next week, we will have a tax expert on board. This guy is amazing. He knows his stuff and helps a lot of landlords. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do, so you don't miss that and you can get that prompt. This figure has increased 175% from 242,000 a decade ago. Wow. But despite most new purchases going into limited company structure, only around 15% of all rental homes owned by private landlords are held in such a way. But this is because it may be expensive to switch. That's my take on it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Appreciate. Stay safe. Have a good evening. And until next week live. Thank you.